For over a decade, Turkey's been playing this incredibly high-stakes game in Syria. And now, well, the dust is finally settling, and what's emerging on its border is, frankly, shocking. What looks like a huge victory for Ankara might actually be the start of something way more dangerous. To really get it, we have to look beyond the battlefield and dive into the world of ideas.
See, the fall of the Assad regime wasn't just about armies moving around on a map. As the source material points out, it was a fundamental shift in the ideas that now control Syria. This tore open a new ideological space, and certain extremist groups were perfectly positioned to rush in and fill it.
And this presents a fascinating puzzle. I mean, on paper, Turkey won. Its biggest enemies in Syria are gone. But instead of everyone breathing a sigh of relief, the whole region is on edge. So let's unpack why Turkey's biggest win in years might also be its most dangerous gamble yet.
We're going to start by looking at the new power structure in Damascus, and specifically how Ankara sees it.
From a purely strategic viewpoint, this looks like a clean sweep, an absolute home run. Turkey's #1 enemy, Bashar al-Assad, he's out. And its #1 security headache, the Kurdish autonomous project in northeast Syria, dismantled. What felt like a never-ending quagmire now looks like a clear, decisive victory.
But here's the massive catch. The new guy in Damascus, Ahmed al-Shara, isn't just some friendly partner. He's the former commander of Hay'at Tahrir al-Sham, a group that literally grew out of al-Qaeda's branch in Syria. So yeah, Turkey's big strategic win was delivered by a figure with deep roots in Salafi-jihadism.
So how on earth did we get here? To figure that out, we have to rewind the clock to the very beginning of the Syrian civil war and look at a pretty controversial Turkish policy that got a nickname, the jihadi highway.
Back in the early 2010s, Turkey made a huge bet. President Erdoğan ditched his alliance with Assad and went all in supporting the Sunni opposition. This led to an open border policy that, well, opened the floodgates for foreign fighters and weapons to pour into Syria. It effectively created that jihadi highway, just as extremist groups started to take over the rebellion.
And the scale of this was just staggering. In 2013 alone, it's estimated that 30,000 militants passed through Turkey on their way to Syria. This wasn't a trickle, this was a flood.
This whole policy was really a mix of strategic calculation and, let's be honest, some willful blindness. The goal was simple: get rid of Assad no matter the cost. But that cost turned out to be empowering some of the most dangerous extremist groups on the planet, and it gave a crucial lifeline to the rising power of ISIS.
Now, to understand the full picture, we've got to shift gears a bit. We're going to move away from Syria for a moment and look at a critical turning point that happened inside Turkey itself. This is where the foreign and domestic stories collide.
The failed coup attempt in July 2016, well, it changed absolutely everything. Erdoğan blamed the Gulen movement, a former ally that had become his arch-enemy, and he launched a massive purge that would completely reshape Turkish society, and critically, its entire religious landscape.
I mean, the scale of this purge was immense. We're not talking about just a few arrests. Entire institutions were dismantled. Universities, thousands of schools, dorms, and even people inside the state's own Directorate of Religious Affairs were removed.
The consequence of this was huge. The Gulen movement's giant educational network had kind of acted as an ideological shock absorber, right? It was promoting a more moderate, mainstream version of Turkish Islam. When that was all ripped out, it didn't just get rid of a political rival, it created this massive vacuum in how an entire generation of religious kids was being brought up. So who steps in to fill this huge ideological hole? Well, none other than the president's own son, Bilal Erdoğan. Through foundations like Tugva, he started building a brand new youth architecture, one that was based on piety mixed with absolute unwavering political loyalty. And this wasn't just about shaping values. It was about building the actual infrastructure for a dynastic succession.
Okay, so we've seen the foreign policy gamble in Syria and this massive domestic power play in Turkey. Now we're going to see how these two threads are twisting together today, with some really dangerous consequences.
And this reveals a massive contradiction at the heart of Turkey's counterterrorism strategy. On one hand, the state goes after groups like ISIS and the PKK aggressively. But on the other hand, its relationship with HTS, the group now running Syria, has been way more, let's say, ambiguous. Yeah, it's officially a terror group, but Turkey kept the lines of communication open, provided indirect help, and even shielded it with its own troops in Idlib. It is a classic double game.
And this double game has had some serious blowback at home. Back in 2020, a well-known pro-government cleric made this absolutely explosive claim. warning that thousands of Salafist groups inside Turkey were arming themselves. It suggests the very ideology Ankara was tolerating abroad was starting to grow roots at home.
And this threat is very, very real. The deadly raid in Yalova brought it all into sharp focus. A standoff with a suspected ISIS cell left 3 police officers dead and led to hundreds of detentions. It was a clear, brutal sign that these extremist networks are not just a foreign policy issue, they are a lethal domestic one.
So what is the real endgame here? What is the motive behind this incredibly risky strategy?
And this brings us to the most important question, really. Is this about a genuine belief in an ideology, or is it just a cold, calculated power play? Is this all about national security, or is it about securing a political dynasty for the president's son?
Ultimately, what we're looking at is a regime survival strategy. By cultivating a tougher, more combative religious nationalist base, the leadership can discipline a new generation, frame all politics as an existential struggle for survival, and, most importantly, build the social foundation they need to secure a dynastic succession for Bilal Erdoğan.
But here is the final, and maybe the most chilling thought. This entire project relies on the idea that you can control radicalization, but is control just an illusion? When you normalize an entire ideological ecosystem for your own political gain, do you really get to choose which parts of it grow, and which parts might eventually turn on you?